I've chosen a rather odd phrase for the introduction of this talk: nuts, bolts, and power tools. And this is because I want to try and think about shared decision making as something extremely practical. I miss my toolbox, actually. Some of you may know I've moved to a different country recently. I miss my cellar and the toolbox, do-it-yourself enthusiast. And I miss my nuts and bolts and power tools. But what I want you to think about here is to try and make shared decision making something really practical for day-to-day routine practice between clinicians, providers, and patients. Because I firmly believe that what we need to think about is about the work that happens in clinics. I want to acknowledge the institutions that have supported me for many, many years. Still at Cardiff at the moment, although I'll be leaving shortly. But also Nijmegen in the Netherlands, where I did my PhD. These are just a few of the collaborators that I've enjoyed working with over the years. Many are here in the audience. I'm not going to go through them all, but I want to thank them personally for their fantastic collaborations. There's one in particular that stands out to me. Some of you will know Richard Groll from Nijmegen. He founded the Institute of Quality there, Quality Healthcare. He was my PhD supervisor and really a lifelong mentor. Without him, I don't think I'd be here. Now I'm working at this new center at Dartmouth, and I'm very grateful for their support and for convening a team, which I'll tell you a bit about them later. This has been a new chapter in my life. But also working alongside people like Jack Wemberg, Jim Meinstein, and Elliot Fisher at the Dartmouth Institute, who are world famous for their work on variation. But how many of you here will know this person? Any hands up? He moved to the USA from Hungary in the early 1900s. He's Ludwig van Bertalanffy, a theoretical biologist who's famous for his work on general systems theory. Building from a cell to an organ, to an organism, to an individual, to a group, to an institution, to an organization. The way that these are interconnected and how it takes many disciplines to sort out issues. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize, but he died before I think he was awarded that. His work were read by this guy. Who knows him here? Yeah, Ron does, because Ron Epstein is from Rochester. This is George Engel, one of the first really to put it together that medicine is much more than biology. It's about psychology and our social life. He coined the term biopsychosocial model. That'll be familiar to you. I think his work was read by this guy. Who knows? Yeah. I think there's a picture of him as a GP in England, in Cambridge, before he moved to Canada in 1967. He is Ian McWhinney. Father, many of us think, of primary care. That's a discipline. And actually the originator of the term, or at least the pioneer of using the term, patient-centered care. His work led to Moira Stewart, who's still working in London and Ontario and Canada, writing about patient-centered care. Many books, and has influenced the medical curricula of all medical schools, I would say. But has it influenced clinical practice? There's a gap between what people are taught and what they espouse or do in clinic. Okay, so where does this leave us? The 1970s, 1980s, Mayo Stewart writing about patient-centered care. This is a father of social psychology, Kurt Lewin, and I love this phrase, what he said, there's nothing as practical as good theory. It comes me back to the nuts, bolts, and power tools issue we'll see in a moment. When I saw that and I was thinking about this, of preparing this slide about, you don't need to know the detail, but it's about all the decision-making theories, many of which have been used to make decision tools for patients. It's a timeline from the 1940s to the early 2000s. You'll see expected utility there in the 1940s, bounded rationality, and then moving up to Kahneman-Tversky thinking about heuristics as errors in the 1960s, I think it was, 1969. Planned behavior, theory of planned behavior, reasoned action there in the 1980s. And then people like Svensson thinking about differentiation and consolidation. Gigerenzer saying, well, heuristics are not that bad actually, they're helpful. Heuristics as helpful tools. And then here in the 2000s, people thinking emotion is relevant and maybe helpful for decision making. It's a shortcut. We might not be able to survive without using emotion and logic to make good decisions. And I think, is this the kind of decision making theory that helps us in what we do in shared decision making? And I was always felt a bit lacking. Most of these theories think about an individual making a decision by himself or herself. Whereas what we're really talking about in this field is about people making decisions with other people in dyads, maybe more complex. But it's about an agent relationship, or Amiram Gafni talks about the perfect agent. Have the theories addressed this issue? I'm not sure. So the questions I've asked myself over many years now, do we need a conceptual model for shared decision making? Should we be thinking wider than decisions? What about behaviors? What about long-term conditions? How do people manage and prioritize what to do in long-term conditions? At the same time, I was working with Carl May on the margins, if you like, of his ideas about this beautiful theory called normalization process theory. I recommend this theory to you. It's a mid-level theory, as he calls it. It tries to explain why things become normal, why you're all carrying a mobile phone today. It's not that long ago that we had like bricks or handbags, but now we're looking at our email. They've become normalized. It's a complicated theory. It'll take you a few days to read the papers. But if you were to boil it down, there are 4 questions, and they're very important questions. What is the work? Who does the work? How does the work get done? And how do we know the work is done? There's some sociological jargon here, terms that he uses in his papers. Coherence, cognitive participation, collective action, reflexive monitoring. You'll enjoy getting to know what those mean. I'm not going to go into depth today. But these questions are very important. I'll be using these in my talk as I'm going on. So going back to this, does this explain how people make decisions together, or is it more about the individual? What about the situation where you've got somebody with more experience, more knowledge, trying to help somebody who's naive? Actually, it's more complicated than that, isn't it? Because when we're making a big decision, there are many other people that come into the frame. Families, friends, important others, people you trust. Tim Rapley wrote very well about this. I'm not sure if Tim is here at this conference, but the paper I recommend to you about decision making is a distributed model, and we're trying to decide this treatment versus that treatment. How do you go about that? You turn to somebody who's got some knowledge and got some experience. Before Maastricht, 2 years ago now, this group of people came together just the day before and said, let's try and tackle this issue. And in the last 2 years, many things happened. I won't go into detail, but I left my eye off the ball of this particular piece of work, and for that I apologize. So please regard this as work in progress. We're reconvening around this issue at the moment. But essentially, this group of people are working on trying to think about a model for a kind of collaborative deliberation. And we've called it for now collaborative deliberation model. I want to introduce these maybe as a way of thinking about this area. The first thing you need to do when you're facing a tough decision is to have a constructive engagement with another person or persons. You're not going to receive help from somebody that you don't think is in a position to help you, that you don't trust will help you. The second big thing is that you're helped to recognize that there are alternative actions. There are more than one possible route to take. These two issues are often left out of our thinking around shared decision making. We jump straight to option presentation. But these two things of recognizing that there are alternatives and a constructive engagement and developing a relationship are fundamental to being able to do this well. Then what we all know about very well, the comparative learning. Putting options on the table, comparing the attributes, the information about A and B and how they compare. These are decision tools, helping people weigh up the options. And then there are two other steps, I think. Eliciting preferences, not just of the person that you're helping, what now are your informed, constructed preferences, but also the agent themselves. They may have views, experience that the patient may be seeking or may be wanting. It's a sharing of preferences here. What do you think is best here? Let me see what you think as an informed decision maker now. And then, of course, respecting that those need to fit together into an integrated decision at the end. These, I think, are the steps of a collaborative deliberation process. Okay, so where does that take us? I want to now just think a little moment about what's happened in the field over the last 10, 15 years. Since this seminal paper by Cathy Charles, essentially, I mean, I know that the term shared decision-making was used in 1982 in the President's Commission, but this is the paper, I think, that kind of shifted the field to say, actually, there's a different way of doing things. I'm not sure if Cathy Charles is here, but this paper was very important for me and for many others. But what's happened since? Let's go to these two questions. Who does the work and how does the work get done? How have we thought about doing the work? Well, mostly it's been about making tools, decision aids for patients. And when I, jumping straight over the Cochrane review that Stacey's done some fantastic work on that, Dawn Stacey, building on Annette Cochrane's work there, jumping over that a little bit to say, what about the implementation of these tools into real practice? What's happened there? And here's a systematic review that my co-authors here have done over the last couple of years, which is just coming out in BMC, part of the IPDAS kind of collection. What are the results of this implementation process? We looked at studies that tried to implement these tools into practice. Not to do randomized trials, but just try to implement them. We found 17 studies of adoption. Almost all of them use the referral model. In other words, give them to patients either ahead of time or after time, not inside the encounter. And most of them declared barriers. In other words, they struggled. And I think it's true to say that these tools are not being widely used, apart from in some centers of excellence, you might say. You'll know these barriers. Franz Lugara has done some great work on identifying these barriers. I'll list them here, you know them pretty well. Here's the provider barriers, which are also very interesting. The resistance to the use of these tools, that they say that patients don't want to be responsible for decisions, compete with other information, and that distributing the tools is not part of the professional's role. If I try and summarize this, I think at best there's an indifference, maybe even a resistance to these tools, and it's not effective to rely on clinicians to distribute these tools. And as you know, they often question the content. The data doesn't match what I do here at this local setting. Since that paper, this paper by Glyn and others, confirmed this in San Francisco. And £2 million spent in the NHS on making online tools, which the clinicians did not refer patients to. Making them is not enough. Led me to question, is that the work? Is making tools and distributing, is that the work? I'm not so sure, so let's have a deeper look. You may have recalled the MAGIC program funded by the Health Foundation in Cardiff. Some people are here from that program, trying to implement shared decision-making into the NHS in Cardiff and in Newcastle. So some data I want to share with you, what happened when we went to teams. Do providers have the same view about the question, what is the work? This is a paper that Amy's led. Amy's here somewhere. There she is. First substantial paper out of MAGIC, I'd say, using the normalization process theory again to evaluate that program. And here's one of the specialists speaking. To quote him, the agony of the clinical team, the role of the clinical team is to protect patients from the agony of choice. And in his words, I said, he thought the function of the multidisciplinary team should definitely be to quite clearly help people to make what we think is the best decision. And these are patients facing cancer of the base of tongue or cancer of the larynx, where we know from the team, the multidisciplinary team, that's major regret over having radical surgery instead of maybe palliative care. And yet here's a specialist saying, we will make the right decision for them. And his colleague who led this team of surgeons, had this to say: involvement in MAGIC has been a surprise for me. I'd always believed we roughly thought the same way, because we were roughly taught the same way. But in fact, we have polarized views about how that should happen. We'd uncovered in this team totally different views about how to work with patients. And we left this team worse off than when we started, because we created a conflict inside them. They didn't know that they had different views. We called this paper patchy coherence. And I think this patchy coherence exists in many clinical teams. Not everybody thinks the way we think. So let's go back to this, how does the work get done? And some of you here in the audience helped me put an edited book together recently. This book here, which I think will be available later. Commentaries from these areas here in Palo Alto, in Group Health, Dartmouth Hitchcock, North Carolina, Massachusetts General, Stillwater, Minnesota, and Cardiff and Newcastle. Almost all of them using the distribution model of a referral model of decision aids. Cardiff and Newcastle slightly different. But how I would thematically summarize them was that they were all projects facing competing organizational demands. I don't want to be too much glass half empty here, because there are examples of integration in group health. We've seen the papers by David Hartburn and his colleagues in group health. Wonderful work there. And in Dartmouth, of course, and also in Massachusetts General. But these are, I think, exceptions to the rule. It's difficult work. Let's go back to what is the work again, therefore. And now to a part of the world that's become more familiar to me recently, and to a project that I very much enjoyed working my colleagues with in San Francisco, led by Dominic. We were given this title, by the way, by Susan Denson, not our own title. And we were resisting it at first, but it seems to have worked very well. I want to share some quotes from patients that we interviewed. And bear in mind here the context, that these were 6 focus groups from Palo Alto in California. These were 48 people, educated and wealthy. You could say amongst the most materially privileged people on the planet right now. This is what they had to say about working with doctors. The fear of potential retribution. If I were to do that, I would think, is the guy going to be pissed at me for not doing what he wanted? Is he going to come out in some way that's going to lower the quality of my care? Will he do what I want, but resent it and therefore not quite be as good? or in some way detrimental to the quality of my care. This is a 64-year-old man from Carlton. And this person, I ended up apologizing, saying, I hope I didn't upset you by saying I didn't want surgery. It isn't that I don't trust you or like you, but I was backpedaling and saying, I hope you're not mad at me. And this very powerful statement, it would feel very uncomfortable if I felt like I were challenging the doctor. I probably would do it, but part of the issue with doctors being gods, if you disagree with him, you're challenging a god. And if you don't want to do that, because it's not a very safe thing to do. Think about the work that we're trying as a community to do here. Ask patients to be part of the decision-making process when this is what they fear if they do so. So, on to the last part of Carl May's normalization process theory. How do we know the work is done? Well, I'm going to lean here with permission on Franz Legari's update to the Cochrane Review. Did an enormous piece of work, 18,000 abstracts, found 39 studies, primarily RCTs, and they've used these kinds of measures. 9 observer-based measures, 27 used patient-reported measures, and 3 used both. Here's the effect issue. Not the effect size, but whether or not they had an effect at all. And I put this in 2 ways. Framing issue. 14% of the studies with intervention targeted patient had an effect. Turned out the other way, 86 did not have an effect, and so on. Whereas at the end, you might say 41% of patients targeted both patient and provider had an effect, 60 more or less had no effect. These are randomized controlled trials with all the effort that goes into randomized trials. It's hard work. And the question I want to ask you here is, only 3 used a process measure as well as a patient-reported measure. And we know that there are problems with patient-reported measures on the whole. They act a bit like satisfaction surveys. So where are we in the field, you could argue, where we've got the difficulty knowing whether the patient-reported measure really indicates whether the process was good? Well, I want to turn now to a group that has convened around me in Dartmouth. You'll meet them here, many of them. It's a great team. I'm very grateful for their coming to Dartmouth to work on these issues. We felt, I think, that it was time to get back to the nuts and bolts issues here. What do I mean by that? Well, think about a bolt. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't been bolts keeping your airplane together and keeping this room here up. Bolts have a very basic architecture, but they're very well defined. All these names for the terms that you'll see in a bolt. And actually, here's the important thing about a bolt, I think, is the conceptual model. That every angle, pitch, rounded base, and flat top is defined to a precise level. And in fact, in 1948, NATO issued a standard that all bolts would be the same. This is why they work together. Now, the problem we're facing is that we're measuring a much messier situation. People speaking together, it's not easy to measure this. It's certainly not the same as milling steel. We can't come to anywhere close to a micrometer in terms of precision. But I think we can do better at getting inside the black box. Here's the measurement challenge in the field that Isabel Scholl has clearly illuminated a couple of years ago, and I think is working on an update to this review. There are problems. There are ceiling effects, there's validity concerns, there's construct uncertainty, and there's measurement burden. Long patient-reported tools, and problems with the observer-based measures in terms of burden on research, audio tapes, and so on. And here's a real difficulty we're facing, is the index decision specificity. Within any consultation, there are 3 or 4 decisions. And in medicine overall, thousands, tens of thousands of different types of decisions. How do you begin to measure this issue in a generic way? Vicky Entwistle illuminated this issue, that when we use the term involvement to patients, they think about it in an entirely different way to us. We've got a construct problem when we use some academic terms when we put them in patient-reported measures. We've got a 6 and a 9. So we felt there was a measurement gap, and we felt that it was really time at least to give it a go, to come up with a short measure that was relevant to all clinical encounters, that works with the words that patients understand, words that work well, and that was based on a conceptual model. So we've given this a go, and I want to share the work of the kind of Dartmouth team, the preference lab, with you. The work, well, we regarded it to be the collaborative deliberation work, those 5 issues that I mentioned earlier. The score, the scale is just published, so you're welcome to talk to Paul Barr and Rachel, who are here, and Tom and Stuart and Melissa, who worked on this and just published the first paper in this series. But here's, I think, what I feel very proud of, is that we went to 27 different patients and said, what do these words mean to you? We then tested it with 30 patients after that and said, do these make sense? And what we found is that words are just options, decisions, and preferences were not interpreted consistently. That the phrases that they understood well were what matters most and the next steps rather than decisions. Here are the items. They're very simple and very straightforward, but they're very generic. And I think these would work for somebody facing a long-term condition, what to do, what to prioritize in your diabetes, weight, or hypertension, or your diet, as well as somebody facing a crossroads decision, knee versus no knee replacement. We've done a simulated psychometric study, and just briefly give you some details of that. We had over 1,000 participants drawn from Survey Sample International. We used a 5-item version and a 10-item version of Collaborate ISDM Q9 from Hamburg, the doctor facilitation subscale, the patient involvement scale. And we created essentially ideal types, animations. Patient with frizzy hair, doctor with a stethoscope around his neck. And we voiced over a person having sciatica and the doctor doing a different version of shared decision making. 6 different encounters were created, and we used these 3 dimensions of information given, eliciting preferences, and integrating preferences. And so you'll see by the 6th encounter, we had all those dimensions included, and we varied them across the other encounters. So you'll see the dimensions on this side, 0, 1, 2, and 3 dimensions, hoping that the score would reflect the different levels of shared decision making or collaborative deliberation in these encounters. Here's the results from this simulated study. 46 for the 0 dimensions, 69 for the 1 dimension, 82 for the second, and a smaller increase for the 3rd dimensions together. Now, we're hopeful, of course, that this will work in a real clinical situation, and we're trying that out over the next few months, and hopefully over the next few years, if we manage to get some funding. But this, we hope, shows at least some promise of trying to get at that issue from the patient's perspective. We just demonstrated this in the psychometric exercise. So let me just try and summarize. It's 2013. Where are we on patient-centeredness as viewed by this community? Well, there are many authoritarian providers out there. There are fearful patients. It's not a good mix. There's resistance to use of these tools in workflows, and there's, importantly, a big lack of aligned incentives. In fact, some would argue that you're penalized for doing this kind of work rather than rewarded. It takes more time, and if it leads to less procedures in the USA, you'll lose income. So this is not a good situation. So the last thing then, power tools. What do I mean by power tools? Well, who here recognizes this person? It's Michel Foucault, who talked about power. And of course, we're talking here about power in these clinical encounters, or at least, I think if I, maybe too strong a term, but I'm going to use it anyway, the abuse of power. He said, when you look at a picture like this, institutional norms force you to see it in a particular way. The person with a pen, with a paper, with the leaning forward stance and the spectacles, you might automatically think is the practitioner. And actually we're coded to think about clinical environments in this way, where the power lies in the profession. Whereas, of course, what we're trying to do in our field is to say that this is the patient using a tool to help inform them about the options available to them, such that they can voice their preferences. And there's a long way to go. I think Michel would probably say you need some different types of tools. You need point-of-care engagement tools, because giving these tools ahead of time doesn't change things inside where the work gets done in the encounter. These tools you'll recognize from the Mayo Clinic. I think they're amongst the most elegantly designed and well-designed tools that are available to us. They're designed to create a conversation inside the encounter. But here's the thing. I was privileged to ask to review a paper from this group, a meta-analysis of 6 trials done in a very few short time span of 229 videotapes from the Mayo Clinic, asking the question, did the clinicians use these tools as intended? You'd think they would, given Victoria's presence in the Mayo, right? But actually, fidelity of use, in other words, using them as intended, was associated with knowledge and involvement gain, definitely. But there was less than intended fidelity. In other words, people did not use them as the group had intended. There was short instruction, they admit that. But what's fascinating to think about here is that they did have a small effect size, but there's a missing effect size. Imagine what would happen if these tools had been used as intended. So here's my own effort to create short tools that fit into the encounter with the option grid collaborative. You may be familiar with these tools. I'm not going to show them in any great detail, but basically asking frequently asked questions down the side, comparing options across the horizontal rows. Here's some data from a trial that I'm running in Manchester. It's not finished, it's early data. That clinicians are subverting the use of these tools. They're using them as an information dump at the end, and they're reinforcing recommendation. You'll want to do this because, rather than let's compare the options. So how hard is this one? So, coming to a summary then, and hopefully to a conclusion. Tools as we've designed them, I think, are a very small part of the solution. They were the easy bananas, right? They were the low-hanging fruit. Workaround solutions to where the action takes part, the clinical encounter, I think are unsustainable. Avoiding the work that needs to be done in that black box is an error, in my view. And without good measures, we are lost about what happens in that encounter. Observational tools as well as patient-reported, and finding the match between them, because we've only got 3 studies where we've got data points from both observation and patient-reported. And here's the missing bit, I think, although many people are working on this angle and working very hard on it. I think we've we're not realizing the full power of the patients, as is happening anyway, I think. I think we should avoid asking people to read anything. Reading should be banned. We need to turn our minds to some degree of innovation here, which is happening in the world around us in terms of technology. I'm not sure how many of you have worked with an avatar, an embodied conversational agent, but here's some work from Boston, which is just fascinating. Meet Louise, who is given to you in a computer as you leave with heart failure to the hospital, who asks you every morning, how are you? Did you enjoy the Red Sox game? Did they get the right score? And then she asked you about your weight, your symptoms. And by the end of this project, the patients did not want to give Louise up. They didn't want to give the computer back to the project. And actually reduced admissions too. Meet Gabby, who talks to teenagers about contraception in the words that they understand and about issues that they wouldn't dare talk to other professionals about. Second Life, where patients of their own volition create worlds where people with disabilities meet together, talk about their challenges, and create self-organizing groups to support each other. Gamification. I don't think we've understood how to use this well yet, how to make games out of our comparative learning issues. And EUTIA. Here's the most fascinating thing of all that. My colleagues here, Stuart Brandy, are studying at the moment. People like this loading up a video where he has manic depression, and hundreds of other patients like him coalescing and commenting on the video and saying things, thank goodness you put that video there. It's a bit of hope for me because now I understand how you're dealing with this issue. And forming learning communities and self-supporting, self-organizing channels for different disease groups. I don't think we've understood how to tap into the power of this patient work. So back to Ian McWhinney then, 1970s. I think it's a different world we're facing in medicine at the moment. These issues, I'm not going to go over them in any great detail, but this is the medicine that we're now facing. Here's also some of what we're facing. £30 billion faced by the pharma in promoting their solutions. That's quite a challenge. Here's where I think we are. And here's an abuse of power that was melting away in the 1860s, based on race and color of your skin. Here's an abuse of power that melted away in the 1960s by Margaret Mead going to Samoa, finding that women had different roles in society. Here's Charlotte Williamson talking about slightly different abuse of power, the abuse of the role of agency, where you overrule other people's preferences. But it gives me hope that a journal like the BMJ is willing to put a cover like this up to say, let the patient revolution begin. And I just want to use the words of Margaret Mead at the end here to say that I feel privileged to be part of a community that's trying to change this. Thank you very much.